Let me show you this model here. So this is a ship designed and folded a very long time ago, like 6 or 7 years ago. It still looks okay, right? And now with one technique called grafting, we can make a completely new model with much more new details on this this dragon head of the ship. So how do we do that while keeping it still at one single square? The technique is called grafting, and it's a really powerful tool, and we're going to learn how to use it today. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, welcome back. Or if you're new to the series, welcome. I'm glad you're joining us. But also I want to make sure you're caught up, so if you're new to the series, make sure you check out the previous few videos. The links will be in the description, so make sure to check that out. So today, as you can see, we're going to learn about grafting. And so if I remember the last video, it was kind of soft skills. It was a lot of just shaping and kind of winging things and making it, doing it on the fly. This time, if that didn't click with you, maybe today's lesson will, because grafting is something that is very mathematical sometimes, and we're going to be opening up the model and dealing with crease patterns and stuff. Speaking of which, we're not using a whole lot of heavy crease pattern knowledge, but if you've never done crease patterns before, they will be pretty confusing. So I recommend you at least know something about crease patterns, at least the basics. So make sure to check out Origami by Boyce. He has some really good crease pattern videos. If you've never done that before, you should probably get yourself familiar with that and then come back and watch this video. So before I tell you what exactly grafting is or how it works, let's talk a little bit about why we should do it. What are the benefits of doing it? So grafting is a technique you use to build off of your traditional base design. So if you remember from the last video, I mentioned that a lot of the times people will come up with the same model from the same base, because of course they're the same base, right? They're going to end up with similar things. So grafting is a way we can differentiate them. You can say that, okay, this is my model, I grafted it differently than yours, and therefore we have different designs, and you can be more unique in that way. Additionally, it's more objective differences, where in the past it would be, oh, I shaped my legs a little differently. It's a little bit more subjective. Here it says my structure is different, my proportions is different, and therefore the models are different, and undeniably. Another reason, if you remember from the previous method, there are times when a flap might just be too short, and no matter how good your shaping skill is, there's no way you can make that flap longer enough. So what grafting can do is it's almost like magic. It'll just summon in paper to where you need it. Like you saw the boat example, it'll just summon in paper into the front to make a head, and it'll still keep it a square, uncut square. Before we actually learn what grafting is, it might be a little bit confusing if we don't get this concept down first. So this concept, I don't know if there's a name for it, so I'm just going to call it a rule of thumbs, because it's kind of general. It doesn't always apply. But essentially, more often than not, the more paper allocated into an area, the more detail you can create in that area. So let's go to the other camera, and I'll explain what that means as an example. Now this is an in general rule of thumbs, right? This is not a proof, this is not a theorem. I can't really explicitly prove it to you. But I can kind of show you an example of why this might be true. So I've got a little fish base here, which I pre-creased. So I want you to notice that these two flaps, these two big ones, are the same length. Alright? And what I'm going to do, and this flap is plain, right? It's like really plain, no details. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add detail onto this one, and because I've already pre-creased it, it's nice and easy. And now it's got, I was forced to pleat it, which made it shrink, but those pleats allow me to get this jagged edge. And by the way, unrelated, but this is a really cool technique for teeth, which I learned from after folding TKG Origami's Mosasaurus, and later I reused this technique in my own shark skeleton design. So the top jaw uses this technique. Anyways, but now you see that this flap's got more detail, but it's now way shorter. You see that? Another thing to notice is that these short flaps, right, that's pretty close, they're about the same length. Right, these short flaps are about the same length as this super detailed flap. But the difference is that because this one doesn't have as much detail, it takes up much less area on the crease pattern. See, so the detailed flap takes up this whole section, whereas this tiny little undetailed flap takes up only this much. So hopefully that gives you an idea that it's generally true that the more paper the flap takes up, the more detail you can incorporate into that. And so this principle will be very useful for us when we're grafting. So once we understand this, now grafting can make a little bit more sense. So let me explain, what is grafting? So grafting is when we strategically incorporate strips of paper into the crease pattern. And again, I'll explain what that looks like later. We're going to incorporate strips of paper into the crease pattern while keeping it a square, right? In order to increase the amount of paper in specific areas so that we can create more details in those desired areas. So like the rule of thumb we just learned, if you have more paper in that area, you can create more details in the area. So sometimes it could look like making it longer or wider, or just more pleats in that area, and that will give you more options to shape it into better details. So that's what the basics of grafting is. So we're going to do an example. I'm going to talk about the steps. So here are the steps. I've kind of outlined it. Now again, origami is an art, and it feels weird to be assigning steps and a method to an art, because a lot of the time the process is kind of fluid and you just do what you want, and that's great. That's how art works. But for other people, it's hard to know what to do if you don't have a set of directions. So I've kind of outlined some steps you can try to follow. On the left column, we have the steps from last time. So when you're using the traditional bases in general, the first step is to pick a subject, and then we'll count the flaps. Then we'll pick an appropriate traditional base, so usually fish base, bird base, or frog base. And then we'll test fold it, shape it, and then go back to it and tweak it again. So those are the general steps for last time. If you don't remember, if you're not familiar, make sure to check out the previous lesson about that. Yeah, once you have that base design, then we'll go improve it using grafting. So grafting is not a design method, it's an improvement method, we'll say. So the first step is to analyze your test fold. And then I'll tell you what specifically you're looking for. So you're looking for flaps that are either too short or need more detail. And then you're going to figure out where in the crease pattern those locations are. Then you will arrange the graft in the crease in this pattern. So remember, the graft refers to the strips that we're adding on. And again, it'll make more sense in the example. So we're going to arrange the grafts into the crease pattern. Then we will fill in and scale the graft. So fill in meaning in the strips of paper, what creases are going to go in that strip. And then scaling means how big is the strip proportional to the paper, to the square. And then once we've finished laying out our crease pattern, we'll fold it up, test fold it, and repeat again. So again, tweaking it and whatnot. And that's how the design process works. Okay, so these are the steps. The slides will be linked in the description, so if you want to come back and look at them, or if you want to write them down, it might be helpful. Alright, so if you didn't understand a single thing I just talked about in those steps, not to worry, I don't expect you to. But if you stay tuned to the next video, we're going to actually do an example. We're going to go step by step, we're going to talk through what each step means and how we might do it in an example. And for the sake of the example, we're going to take this ostrich, which I did for homework. I did my own homework from the last video. Here are my 3 things. So I made a walrus from the fish base. I made ostrich from the bird base, which we're going to be reusing today. We're going to build off of this. And here's my giraffe from a frog base. Now, if you got stuck on the homework last time, not to worry. I want you to go back and learn that before you move on to grafting. So if you check in the description of the previous video, there will be a Google Slides link, and you can go and get some help and hints on how you can do this. So it sort of becomes a reverse engineering challenge, and that's totally fine. If you can figure out how I did it, you'll soon be able to make your own. So just go ahead and do that. See if you can figure out how I folded it and fold it for yourself based on the hints I left in there. Okay, so today we're going to be working with the ostrich. We're going to, as I said, we're going to be trying to graft the toes and lengthen the neck. So before we actually do that, I'm going to get you caught up, and I'm going to actually show you how you can fold it, at least the basic idea. So we're going to start with the bird base. We'll go ahead and make a bird base. Before we start actually shaping it, I want you to make sure you know what a bird-based crease pattern looks like. Alright, so take a good look. We're going to be redrawing this later, and we're going to manipulate the crease pattern in Origami. So That's just a heads up. Anyway, so what I did then was I color changed the legs. So the way to do that, I think I mentioned in the last video how to do that, but you can reverse fold it out and then unwrap the layers like that. Okay, you can unwrap on the other side. Okay, and then you can, go ahead and thin out the legs and thin it out and whatnot. I'm not gonna do it, but and then you can do it on the same thing on the other leg, which again is not super important how we folded this. You probably can figure it out, but we'll basically do that. All right, and then what I did was I made a bunch of pleats in here. I ended up actually tucking in I actually folded in a lot of the layers in the back and just pleated it while it was short like that. And then for the neck color changes, I went like this. So I actually folded it up like that. And I'm not going to do it on the other side, but the same idea. And so that way, when I outside reverse fold, it showed white. Okay. So that just gives you the basic idea of how this works. So what we need is we need the neck to be a little longer so we can shape it a little better, because this doesn't quite look like an ostrich. It looks like some sort of standing bird. I'm not a bird biologist, but it looks like some sort of standing bird, and it doesn't have toes. So those are what we need to do. So let's go ahead and what I'm going to do. So if you're not familiar with crease patterns, we might need to do this. If you do know what you're doing, this might be optional. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark here which flaps need to be changed. So these are the legs flaps, and these need to be extended or toed. So I'm just going to write leg here, and then we'll write it on the other side, whatever. Even though this is writing on the color side, and then up here neck. So if you're good with crease patterns, you won't need to do that. You'll be able to track them. But if you're new to crease patterns and you figure out what part goes where in the crease pattern, there's one way you can do it. So what we come up with is, so here's the leg. The leg's basically here. I'm just gonna write it on the white side. What we come up with is we got the neck in the top corner and the legs in the left and right corners. So when we're going to go into Origami, we're going to remember that we need the left and right corners to have toes, the top corner to be longer. So now let's head on over to Origami, and we're going to go through the steps to add a graft.